Okay. Notify users, no? Right. Good morning, students, and welcome to our last broadcast for 2018. I really cannot think that we are at this point, but unfortunately it is true. You will hear that my voice sometimes go a bit shaky. I don't know if it's the flu or a cold, but please bear with me. And I apologize that for the odd cough here and there. So today we will be looking at, we will be having an exam discussion about public relations, the exam in October. A few things just to remind you of. The first thing is that please remember that these broadcasts are recorded. So you should view them afterwards more than once to make sure that you know and you are familiar and you understand what I've said, right? So it is recorded. Please share this with your fellow students so that we can also help them to pass. Do not share the content, share the link to the broadcast, and it's better that they view it themselves. Also, this exam discussion is specifically for October. If in an unfortunate situation you cannot make the October exam and you have to sit for the sub-exam, in the tutorial letter 203, the last tutorial letter, there's also some specific pointers for the sub-exam. But for today, we will only focus on the October exam. Right, what I am planning to do is to work through the tutorial letter 203, the last tutorial letter. It is being uploaded as we speak because we need to have had it edited and the layout done. So it will be on my UNISA once we finish our broadcast. So just to start today, we will be looking at the GPS for the PRO371 exam. What do I mean by GPS? It's just to find your way to prepare for this exam. It's a direction, it's a pointer on what you should do to prepare for the exam, some guidelines on the topics that are important. And the first thing is to say, where do I find this information? The first important one, the guiding document, is actually the TAT 203 for this year, which is our last tutorial letter with some points on exam preparation. Also, you will have to look at the PRO assignments for 2018, both of the assignments. Also, you will have to look at self-assessments on my UNISA. As I work through the whole document, we've got 40 slides here. You will see that in some instances, I identify for you where the topics were addressed during this year, and some of them are in the self-assessments. The reason being is that we cannot cover the whole syllabus in only 2 assignments. So you will have to access the self-assessments on my UNISA. There are model answers. You just basically go to my UNISA, and on the left-hand menu, you will find self-assessments, and you can just basically open it there. So it is important to use the self-assessments in your preparation. And lastly, the study guide, right? The study guide is our own and mainly source, so that is why we will use the study guide for information. So to start right out, we will say our first GPS direction is to familiarize yourself with the systems approach. Now, at this point, assignment 1 addressed it, not a new concept, but let's just see and refresh our memory of what goes into the systems approach. What does it mean? What are the characteristics? And let's work through it. You will see assignment 1, question 2.2 and 2.3, and you will also see some questions in the self-assessments on the systems approach. And that's why I keep on saying, please don't forget the self-assessments. If you leave out the self-assessments, you will not pass this exam. You have to also look at them. Good. The first one, and the one that we did address in assignment 1, is explain the systems approach, the open and the closed approach. Also, we briefly looked at the open system and crisis communication when we looked at the pick and pay scenario. When we look at self-assessments, you will see there's a question about open systems and employee communication, and a question about systems approach and the PR department. So what I did in this whole presentation is to actually identify the sections in your study guide where you can take a look at these aspects. Firstly, we look at the two systems for public relation, which is the open and the closed system, section 1.4 of the study guide. Now, it's very important to know the characteristics of these systems because it can be applied in different scenarios. So when we look at the open system, and remember, detailed feedback was given in your tutorial 201. I'm not going to read through everything because at this stage you should already have come across it, you should be familiar with it. But the open systems basically, well, a good example would be the new logo for APSA where you have the broken circle. Open systems work that way, where you have the opportunities to interact with the external environment and the internal environment, where there's feedback, when there's two-way communication, when you want to acquire balance, where you can proactively plan your actions. So it's basically an open system where there is a free flow of communication from the organization to the outside and vice versa. If we look at the closed system, obviously that is the opposite. It's a closed system. There is no interaction. There's no feedback. There's no desire to proactively plan your communication. There's no desire to obtain balance, and it's mainly one-way communication. Just a note below these two systems is that, remember, we will not ask you to list these characteristics. You will be required to discuss them in full sentences and sometimes in a paragraph or two. So we don't want bullets, and it's very important to read the question to know what we want. We'll come to some action words at the end of the broadcast. Also, the second bullet there at the bottom is make sure that you know the differences between the two systems. Now, this is very easy, because if you know the characteristics of the open system, then the closed system obviously is just the direct opposite of the open system. Sorry, I'm just now fiddling with this microphone here. It seems to move around. Okay, when there are three aspects that, if we go back to the slide here where we have the GPS, where I say that we have to look at crisis communication, we have to look at employee communication, and we look at the PR department. Please don't, be afraid, because this is basically the settings in which the open system can be applied. And you have to know that there are these three you can be prepared for. Maybe one of them will be in the exam. The first thing is crisis communication. Now, the secret to the systems approach is that if you know the characteristics, you will be able to do this by just considering the context, which is crisis communication. And when I show you the model answer, you will see the familiar terms and characteristics of the open system. So if you are required to discuss why the open system could benefit crisis communication, you will immediately see the characteristics. It allows for immediate action, it allows for two-way communication and feedback, and it allows the organization to respond to challenges. It can be monitored, it can be adjusted, and proactive action can be taken. The important thing is to know that you have the open system and it's got those characteristics. Now apply that to crisis communication. And that is quite easy to do if you know the characteristics. The second one in our GPS is the one on employee communication, right? The same principle applies. Know the characteristics of the open system and think about employee communication. That is internal communication with the staff of the organization. So how can open system benefit employee communication, right? And you'll see the familiar words. It allows interaction, response to changes, proactive action, two-way communication, feedback, and of course the open system will allow the organization to build relations with the employees, because then the employees will be involved in the communication. The third one is about open systems and the PR department. So that's even more narrow. Crisis is like a broad setting. Your employee communication is a bit smaller. And then the PR department is those people who are responsible for the public relations. So can an open system approach be beneficial? And yes, of course, an open system in all these scenarios is the most beneficial. There are not really any reasons that you can make out for using a closed system. So the open system is very beneficial in a PR department, and there you have to address the setting, right? It paves the way the PR department will communicate with all the publics of the organization, internally and externally. Those people involved in that PR department will be able to use two-way communication, will be able to obtain feedback, will be able to plan proactively, will be able to maintain a balance, and make adjustments and take action. Okay, so what I'm saying is that make sure you know the characteristics of the open and the closed system. Because for this matter, I could always ask you, why will a closed system not work in a PR department? Right? Interesting. It will just flip the coin around and there will be no feedback, no interaction, no adjustment, no action. Okay, so if you know the characteristics, it's easy to apply that system in a specific setting, as long as you discuss it within that context. Right, I hope this is clear. Another GPS direction that you will find in your TAT 203 is about crisis communication. Also, not something new to you. You've seen the crisis communication term, you've seen crisis plan, not a new concept, right? And there we have it in assignment 1, and we also have self-assessments that address some of the aspects of crisis communication. Assignment 2 is where we had the crisis plan, right? Where we had the elements from your study guide that you had to apply practically. That is where you will find, apologies, the crisis plan. This is a battle. Right. And then also in assignment 1, we had this question about the characteristics of a crisis. In the self-assessments, you will see questions on the term crisis. What is a crisis? You will see a question on the types of a crisis, and you will also see a question on which elements are required for successful communication during a crisis. So just to wrap up, explain the term crisis. There's the section. It is that extraordinary situation, that sudden experience without any warning that can actually hamper the not only the relations but also the reputation, and threatens the existence of the organization. So that is what a crisis is, and you can go and check it out on in the study guide in section 10.2. Also, explain crisis communication. This was in your assignment. Remember that crisis communication is one term, it's one concept. It's that communication that is a PR activity, right? That is used by the organization during the crisis. This question does not say, explain the term crisis. It refers to crisis communication, which is that activity that the organization is involved in during a crisis with all its publics. It is there to ensure the reputation of the organization, open and honest communication, and to ensure the existence of the organization. So you have crisis and you have crisis communication. Crisis is the actual event. There was a fire, there was a strike, there was an armed robbery, and crisis communication is when you talk about this crisis with all your publics for specific purposes. When we look at the 3 types of crisis, immediate, emerging, and sustained crisis, Very easy to differentiate. Immediate is that sudden action, unplanned without a warning action, armed robbery. Nothing can foresee that. It's an immediate crisis. Emerging crisis is one that runs over a longer period. It happens suddenly, but it gives you time to prepare, such as a strike. You saw it coming. There were warning signs. People were unhappy. Things were said, and you know it's coming. So it's emerging. Sustained crisis is an ongoing crisis. Often it lasts for years on end. You know, rumors of corruption, downsizing, restructuring, people losing their jobs. It's an ongoing crisis. It's very difficult to contain. It's very difficult to handle. But those are the three types of crisis. And make sure that you can also refer to an example of each. Also in the TAT 203, we have a question that says, explain, or a guideline that says, explain the three elements for successful communication. So to ensure that your crisis communication is successful, there needs to be a communication plan as part of your crisis plan. So the crisis plan that we had in our assignment is a good example of the communication that you will use during the crisis. Also, you must be able to assemble a team, a crisis team. You will remember crisis team is one of the elements in our crisis plan, where you have to draw up a list, you have to get some knowledgeable people together that can assist during a crisis. Maybe an operational manager, maybe the CEO, maybe an HR specialist, and the public relations practitioner. Right? So there must be people available that can assist during the crisis. And the third element is there must be a single spokesperson. Now, you will understand that if the media prefers to deal with one person in an organization, and normally the same person, because the relationships are built, and for contingency matters or issues, you cannot have two people speak to the media, right? They might contradict one another. Different information might be shared. A single spokesperson needs to be appointed by the organization, and it can range from being the CEO, a labor specialist, or even the public relations practitioner. So those are the three elements that can ensure that communication is successful when you have a crisis. We look at the characteristics of a crisis. This should also not be new to you. You've seen it in your assignment. It presents itself unexpectedly. It threatens the future existence of the organization. It develops at an ever-increasing rate, so it feeds on the strain, and it actually enlarges. If not controlled, it creates havoc with the organizational finances, because it's often not budgeted for. So it can be quite draining on the finances, and it requires quick action to control. Nothing new. You have seen this in your assignment and detailed feedback in your tutorial 201. Right, and then it's also important to study the crisis plan. Also a complete example in your tutorial 202 about the elements, the practical application of the elements. It's very important. For the crisis plan, we will not ask you to discuss the steps. We will ask you to use the steps or the elements and write your own crisis plan. Also remember that I can ask you to complete any of these elements. I can basically say to you, there's a crisis in your organization, complete the staff schedule for me. It's one point of this crisis plan, and you should be able to give me in a table format, identify the staff that you would put on your schedule, the duties, the hours that they work, their contact numbers. So I can also ask you to give me your crisis management team. Okay, not necessarily the whole plan, but just one step or two steps of the plan. So it's very important to understand the steps, the elements, look at the example I've given you, and make sure that you can complete, those elements of a crisis plan. Moving on to another GPS direction, important to look at the corporate publics program. Your assignment refer to publics, communication methods and effects. And in the end, we only considered your effects, but I tried to make comments in the communication methods that you submitted, but it was not considered for marking. So in assignment 1, question 201, there's also some guidelines in the self-assessment and then also in the section. Now for the corporate publics program, this is also not a new program. You should make sure to submit PR examples. I have mentioned it in previous broadcasts that the examples in your study guide, some of them are from marketing, from HR. We require you to give us PR examples. So let's just look at that direction again. Make sure that you can identify publics, that you can formulate public relations objectives. So objectives will not be to train people or to give them incentives or to sell more products. You will have to formulate PR objectives. And then also thirdly, you must be able to give us some relevant PR communication methods. We are busy with public relations. It's all about communication. Now, in the next slide, I give you a complete example of such a table. On the left-hand side, we have the publics and the PR objectives and then the communication methods. And you will see that these objectives are all related to public relations. They are all communication-based, right? We don't have marketing in there. We don't have advertising in there. We don't have HR in there. Public relations objectives for your organization, and then also relevant communication methods. Just one note on the methods. A lot of students refer to donations and sponsorships as communication methods. Those are not communication methods. When we talk about communication, we talk about two-way communication. So by making a donation, you're not communicating anything. It's a gesture of your CSI program or upliftment of the community. It's not a communication method. It might be a PR activity, but it's not a communication method. So you will see that all of those methods allow for feedback and interaction and two-way communication. So make sure that you submit the correct examples. So what you will see in this table is there are no communication effects at this stage. We're focusing on publics, PR objectives, and communication methods. Now, another direction is to look at the broad categories of the publics of the organization, also not something new. If it's new, you've missed somewhere something in our assignment 1. It was the first question about latent and active publics. This is not a new concept. You should know about this. Also, some feedback in your tutorial letter 201. So as we look at the section in the study guide, the latent publics and the active publics, remember the latent publics, it's got everything to do with they don't know that they are connected to the organization. So they are not aware of their connection. They're not aware that they are actually influenced by the activities of the organization. And a good example here is your general public. Often they don't realize that they are aware of the organization's, the influence of their activities on them. So the general public is normally a very good example. Some students complicated these two terms, these two publics, and came up with some totally unrelated examples. General public is a good example of a public who could maybe not be aware of their connection. Now the opposite is the active public, and those are the people that our PR practitioners wants to activate. The active publics of the organizations know and they realize that they are part of the organization. Right? They are aware of their connections. They know that the decisions made by the organization affect them. And a good example here, obviously, are your employees. Right? It may be the unions, the media, shareholders. Those are the people that can be regarded as active publics. Now, sometimes or often they are not really active because the practitioner, has not made clear to them the connection that exists. So the goal of the practitioner will be to change all the publics into active publics, because then you have an active involvement of everyone that shares in, you know, the activities of the organization. Another GPS direction is also something that was in your assignment, the consequences of not identifying the publics. So apart from regarding latent and active publics, the practitioner will also decide on who is your most important public, secondary publics, and so on. So if the organization does not know who the publics are, whether they're latent, active, primary, or secondary, it will have some consequences for the organization. And in assignment 1, question 1.2, apologies, we have the consequences of not knowing your publics, right? Money will be wasted, messages will not reach the correct public, resources such as working hours, materials, equipment will be wasted, and objectives will not be achieved. Also, and very important, management could be dissatisfied with the PR actions. And the PR often in organizations have to actually battle to get recognition. So it's very important that the practitioner knows who the publics are. And thereby they can gain, you know, the support of management by ensuring that the messages reach the right people to achieve your objectives, not to waste money, right, and resources. Another GPS direction is about research. Now, research we did not touch on in our assignment, so it's very important that you access your self-assessments and look at the questions that we have there. Firstly, the importance of research for the PR practitioner. We look at the term environmental scanning, and we look at 2 techniques for environmental scanning. So research is very important to the PR practitioner, as it is needed to inform and the execution and the planning of a PR program. In other words, when you do research, you will know who your publics are. You will also know what the problem is, and it will direct some choices in terms of actions and activities. It's also used at the end of a program, right, to determine the success of that program. And I just think about the ROPE program, which has the last step, the evaluation step. That is quite exactly what this is all about. You cannot just execute a program, spend money, try to achieve objectives, but not have something tangible to show management. We have actually reached this objective. So it's very important for the practitioner. And many communication decisions are actually made on research and the findings of research. When you look at environmental scanning, you will now immediately maybe think of the media monitoring in pre-prac. The media monitoring is an example of environmental scanning. Environmental scanning is exactly what it says. It's to scan the environment. It's a very broad term, and it means that the practitioner will actually try to find some facts to say, what is the problem? What is the current situation? What is going on there? What needs to be addressed? Right? So environmental scanning is the monitoring of the organization's environment. And that can be internal in the organization or external. So what's going on in my organization? What is going on here? What is the problem? What needs to be done? Or what is going out there in the environment? And there are 2 techniques that you will find in section 8.3 of your study guide. The first one is competitor intelligence, very important. Most organizations are competing in the market against other organizations. So it is to know your competitors. What are they doing? Why are they successful? What are they doing that can affect my organization, right? And it then also allows the organization to act proactively. So that is just what competitor intelligence is. You can achieve competitor intelligence through also media monitoring, because once you're working through your media sources, you can detect what your competitors are doing. It's clear, right? Oh, and there was the other one. I wondered if the other technique is scenarios. I just want to check if it's in here. No, it disappeared, but I will include it in the slides when I load it. So the first one is competitor intelligence, and the other one is scenarios. And scenarios is used to look into the future, right? Let's say there are some feelings about minimum wages in the mining sector. A scenario will be to illustrate how that could impact the mining industry. Usually more than one scenario is set up by an organization. If we do this, that will be the result. But if we do that, this will be the result. It's looking into the future and trying to predict the effect of your choices. So two major techniques, competitor intelligence and scenarios, and I will include that for you when I load the slides. Another GPS direction is to look at the program evaluation and review technique. It is, the acronym is PRO371Q. And you should know the three components of this technique. Also, this is not in your study guide, in your assignments, so you will have to look at your assessments, self-assessments. Study the PRO technique and the three components. So just to explain to you what this technique is all about, it's usually implemented during the implementation of a program or event, and it's all about the activities and the sequence that the activities follow for a specific campaign, right? So when you think about a PR program and there are certain activities, maybe you will start by having an awareness day, maybe then followed by a press conference, internal article, and all of that. So it's the sequence in which the activities will take place. That's just some background on what this technique is all about. So when we look at the components, we look at events, activities, and critical path, and I suggest that you then also read on section 8.11. There I have just summarized for you what it's all about. Events, activities, critical path are the three elements of the PRO. Events are the end points, the end goals, the final result, the completion of major activities. It's called sometimes milestones. In other words, I'm doing some action to achieve that milestone or that goal, right? I've given you an example there. It's like printing invitations for an award ceremony that can be delivered. That's just, you know, some milestones. Let me first print invitations and then deliver those invitations. So it represents a point in time. It's connected to a due date. On this date, we have to have the invitations printed, and on that date, we have to have them delivered. Activities refers to the actions that takes place. So actions take time, and it refers to the resources that one needs, you know, to progress from one event to another event. So we will have a news conference followed by the writing of specialized articles during an awareness campaign, for example, for Momentum Life. So activities are the specific actions. We will first have the news conference, we then write the articles for our awareness campaign. The critical path is the longest or most time-consuming sequence. In other words, you will set out your events and your activities, and the critical path would be determined by those events that's going to take the most time, basically. That is a critical path, and that you will find in that PRO technique. So I suggest strongly that you go back to that section 8.11 and the self-assessments and the model answers, and make sure that you understand this. Also, GPS direction, another GPS direction is about community relations. This also is not new, you know. Remember, you had the ROPE program in your assignment, but that is basically the only reference to the community relations. You have to look a bit wider. You have to look at your self-assessments. We have discussed at least 5 community relations objectives that an organization might have, and debate the importance of healthy community relations. Why is it important to have healthy community relations? So firstly, 5 community relations objectives. In other words, this means that when the organization wants to improve its relations with the community, there are certain things they want to achieve, certain things they want to reach. So let's look at, there are quite a list, and I basically just refer to 5. It's to inform the community about the organization. What are we about? How many people do we employ? Because those employees come from the community, right? And also know how this can be done. We can inform the community through a community meeting. To correct misunderstandings, remember, sometimes the community might be dissatisfied because some rumors were spread and criticisms that are untrue. So you want to correct those misunderstandings. And an example is to reply to them, personal visits, whatever relevant example you can think of. Another one, to gain the community's favorable opinion. You want the community on your side because as an organization, you depend on that community for support, for labor, for buying your products. You want a favorable opinion. So you will have to make sure that they are informed regularly. And an example is community newspapers. Also, to inform the local government about the organization's contributions. You have to showcase your involvement. And that often is done by attending municipal or community meetings, where you can have a space and an opportunity to tell the people about your involvement in uplifting the community. But it's all about to inform them about the community's contributions. Also, to determine what residents think about the organization by attending community meetings, for example. How will you know whether they are latent or active publics, or whether they are viewing the organization favorably or not, if you don't determine what their thoughts about the organization are? So you have to have contact with them. Another objective will be to establish personal relationships between the community leaders and the management, and it speaks for itself. Positive personal relationships, more support for the organization, more positive attitude towards the organization speaks for itself. To support health programs, the organization might have an objective to support programs specifically for health, sponsorships, CSI programs, to contribute to providing funds for cultural events, right? That might be an objective, to aid youth and adult education, maybe an adult learning or education center. That could be an objective. To encourage sport and recreation might also be an objective of the organization. And the relevant examples: sports training, sports team. Also an objective would be to promote better local government through regular meetings and involvement in the organization. So all of these are some of the aims of an organization if they are dealing with a community. What do they want to achieve? What are the most important objectives for community relations? The second one is the importance of building healthy relations, and we've touched on some of those. The first one is the neighborhood, the area in which the organization operates are made up of the community. So a lot of the people are employed in the organization. They have the same characteristics. Social, the investment capital, in other words, the finances, they buy your products, right? They are providing you with some labor. So that is important. An important reason for why you would like healthy relations with your community. Another one is, the organization needs to recognize the importance of the environment. The organization needs to act responsible responsible when it deals with environmental issues. So you will have to also view the community relations as very important. Community relations program aids to build a strategic relationship. It should benefit both the parties, the organization and the community. That's why healthy relations is necessary. Community relations also aims to analyze the community to gain a better understanding of its composition and expectations. So it's not only because you need to know the community because of their support to the organization, it's also to know your community better. How are they composed? What is the demographics? Maybe to identify some needs in the community, to analyze the community. Also, positive communications with the local community, to also get an understanding for what the organization is all about and what the activities are all about. Positive communications with the community to assist to build your corporate image and to employ people who have the knowledge, skills and abilities. It also refers to an organization that needs to align its interests. You cannot just operate in the community and have different interests. It makes sense that to align your interests will also improve the relations, because then the community can see that you are serious about what you do in that area or in that space. So it will actually improve the relations and the support from the community to align interests. It's a good exercise to, look at the organization and determine really what their objectives are, and to look at the objectives of the community and see if you can find a middle way, to obtain the good relations. So another GPS direction is looking at the community relations program, and we've done that. Been there, assignment 2, question 3. As you know, ROPE stands for Research, Objectives, Programming and Evaluation. And what we say in tutorial 203 is make sure that you can discuss every step. In the assignment, we wanted you to complete your own program. But to be able to do that, you should know what goes into every program, every step. So it's not new to you. You should know. If I say research, you should say, well, there's audience research, problem and opportunity research, and so on. So you have to look at the steps. You have to discuss what goes into every step. It's research where you do gather information, where you have to mention that you do client research, opportunity and audience research. Objectives, it's to identify what you want to achieve, to discuss the 2 types, impact and output objectives. And if you go to section 12.7, you will find the program there. Programming refers to the messages and the communication actions, and that should also be public relations actions, not HR actions, not to train people to do a vegetable garden. It should be PR actions. And evaluation is what we said. Research is important to determine the success of all of our programs, and also for this program, where you will look at your objectives and where you will do formal research to determine, have I reached them? Have I been successful? Have I not been successful, and how can I address that? The ROPE program. So let's look at some key points for the PR exam. Important to read your questions more than once. You have to read it more than once to determine exactly what we want you to do. In other words, look at the topic of this question. Is this about crisis communication? Is this about employee communication? Is this about community relations? Read it more than once. You can even underline the topic to just show you this is about crisis communication. What does it ask? Then you look at the mark allocation for each question, right? So the questions in the exam will look a lot like your assignments. It's a 5 mark, a 10 mark, a 15 mark, right? Short and longer. You won't just get essay type questions. So you look at the mark allocation, because that will give you an idea of the length of your answer. You cannot give me 2 pages if I ask you for 5 marks. Discuss or elaborate or discuss why research is important. It's a paragraph for that number of marks. Okay, you cannot just give me 1 sentence if I ask you to complete a program, whatever PR program. Okay, look at the mark allocation. Answer all questions in full sentences. Even if I say identify specific elements, do it in a full sentence. Okay? When we get to discuss, you need to elaborate a bit. But even your short type questions, just make it a proper full sentence. Also, and give examples where asked. There in number 3, all questions in full sentences with examples when we ask you. Then in number 4, determine the type of action. Now that is where I say list or explain or motivate or name or elaborate. Those are action words. It's the action we want from you. Discuss would mean an elaboration. List would mean bullet forms with a full sentence. I will give you a list just after this slide. The total of the exam paper is 75%, and we will convert it to a percentage. There will be 4 questions and you will be required to do 3. I'm convinced that you all can pass. Last year, students set a very high mark for you, and let's see if we can beat that, but they are at the 80% pass mark, so it's going to just require a bit more dedication, but looking at the exam paper, you can pass that. There is no question about it. So here's the list of the action words that you will find in the exam. Identify, name, list means more or less the same. Name the important characteristics. No discussion, but do it in a full sentence. Discuss or debate. That is when you elaborate a bit on a certain topic. And you might look at the positive and the negatives, right? For example, research can be beneficial because it provides important information about the success of the program, but time limitation can maybe hamper research. But look at the question. Discuss or debate. Motivate. This is where you give reasons. I have chosen this approach because of these reasons. So where you have to motivate your selection, your reason for doing or not doing a certain thing in a question, where you motivate your choices. Also, you will find describe. That's a detailed account that is very similar to a discussion, where you have to use full sentence, give more detail in a well-structured sentence or paragraph. Explain is where you have to justify. Explain why this or that is true or not. And you have to provide arguments. You have to say, this is the reasons why. This is my argument. Make use of illustrations, descriptions, right? Your understanding of explain this choice. Your understanding of why this choice is good or bad. Evaluate. Give an informed opinion. The organization X employed a closed system approach. Evaluate the impact on the environment. That's just from the air. That's not a real example. But evaluate is where you look at the positive and negatives to say, well, there is an open system, so I would maybe not choose the closed system. You evaluate a specific opinion. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our presentation. We will look at some questions right now. Just to remind you, these pointers are for the October exam. If you have to sit for the sub-exam for whatever reason, you have to go to your tutorial 203 and you have to look at the section that deals with the exam in January. What was it? Let me just think if I have anything else to share with you. You are welcome to email me if you have any questions about the topics that were not addressed in your assignments. Obviously, those are new concepts, new terms, new aspects, anything that you have a problem with. The first thing I suggest when we leave here is I will upload the slides for this presentation and you can work through them. You should view the broadcaster then again, make sure that you understand what we talk about, and then clear out any questions or uncertainties you have via email. The discussion group doesn't always work that well. We cannot access it on a daily basis, or I cannot ensure that I will be able to access it every day. So it's better to drop me an email. That is what I open up in the mornings when I get in my office, and I will give you a reply. So let's just see if there are any questions. No questions at this point, right? But I do expect that you will have some whilst you're working through, our GPS directions for the exam. Good luck. The exam is not set to catch you out. It's not specifically aimed to have you fail. It's actually, I would wish you to pass. So it's a fair exam paper. It's been moderated externally by an external practitioner who knows our syllabus, who knows the content of our study guide. It's really not an unfair exam paper. I'm sure that you will be able to pass it, and I'm looking forward to marking your exam scripts and maybe to improve the pass mark of last year. Thank you so much for attending.